Steve Dotto here. How the heck you doing this fine day? Me, I am excited to welcome you to our online course, The Anatomy of a Successful Webinar. Now, this little video here is just a quick introduction to let you know what to expect within the body of this course. If you look on the left-hand side of your screen, you will see an outline of all of the different topics that we cover within this course. Now, the course is based on a webinar which we delivered, which perhaps you participated in, called The Anatomy of a Successful Webinar. It'll take you about an hour to watch the entire webinar from start to finish, but it'll give you a great basis for the entirety of what a successful webinar is, including a nice Q&A at the end. The rest of the videos in this particular course are supporting content, where I dive deeper into one of the themes that I touched on within the webinar. So feel free to work your way back and forth. There's no order of completion for this particular course. The videos are all going to be screencast videos where I dive in and show you the tools. I probably won't have my face visible in many of the videos. It doesn't really add all that much in this particular case, and it takes me a lot more time to produce. And this course ended up having a lot more videos than I originally anticipated when I first designed it, based on the great questions that came as a result of the delivery of the live webinar. So dive in, watch the webinar, webinar replay, the anatomy of a live webinar, and work your way through all of the content. If you have any questions, you know where to send them. info@dottotech.com. Till next time, have fun storming a castle. And if the webinar gods are smiling upon us, we have the basis for a successful webinar. The first thing every successful webinar needs is to get on air successfully. Hello, folks, and welcome to our webinar. Slide keynote. There's keynote. All right. And we will start here. Dun, da, 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 the anatomy of a successful. Okay. Thank you, iCloud. The Anatomy of a Successful Webinar by Steve Dotto. Okay, what are we going to expect? I'll start off with just a little brief history of myself. I don't want to spend too much time talking about me, but I think my perspective is important, and in the way that I look at webinars is important. So I'll be talking briefly about that. Then we'll dive into what I consider the 4 keys of a successful webinar are. I'll also walk you through the setup and the configuration of this webinar that we are in right now. Time for Q&A, and of course, the mini course will be following up shortly thereafter. So here's my perspective on webinars. Those of you who are in Canada know that I did about 20 years of traditional broadcast, live radio and television. A part of that was in the middle of our run in about 2000 to 2003. We did a simulcast radio and television show where I took my radio show that was on air. It was a 2-hour radio show, and we started to produce it from a small robotic television studio, and we broadcast it nationally at the same time. So we were actually taking calls and doing a live show on both radio and television at the same time. And it really started to give me an appreciation for what this sort of conversational format is. If you think about it, it's really basically the same thing as you do with the webinar in a lot of cases. I mean, a webinar really almost is live television, isn't it? If you stop and think about it, especially if you start doing things like inserting video clips the way that we do and that sort of stuff. So coming from that traditional background, though, I gained an appreciation for what broadcast professionals bring to the table in both radio and in television, as far as scheduling, as far as planning, as far as the flow of the webinar, as far as the different positions that people play in the webinar. You notice that I very seldom will ever do a webinar solo. I've always got somebody who's a producer that's handling all of the content in the background, because you want your performer, whoever's on air in the webinar, to be able to concentrate 100% on their content. Consequently, they shouldn't be worried about the technical aspects of the background, or if the guest is queued up, or if the video is ready to run. They should be just thinking about the topic that they're talking about. We should be freeing them up. So those are the things that I consider to be essential in a webinar. I don't look at webinars as webinars. I look at them as broadcasts. I look at them as a live broadcast. And so the more value, the more quality that we can bring into that arena, the more value we have, the more respect I show for you and for myself and my content. So that's why I think it's important for you to understand my background. So today's webinar, we're going to be talking to, unfortunately, because we have to do, because of the nature of the online world, the internet, we do care about the tools. When I did a television show, I didn't know what model camera, what model switcher, what model microphone I had, because that was all provided by the television studio or the radio studio. Now we have to care about the tools that we use, because we choose these tools and we manage them ourselves. So I'm using a tool called Webinar Jam, which is the wrapper on top of Google Hangouts on Air. Now, with the announcement of Google Hangouts on Air going away, Google is migrating all of the users over to YouTube Live. And from what I understand, people like Webinar Jam, and certainly they've indicated that this is the case, and other software companies that have built their platforms on Google Hangouts on Air, they're going to be able to migrate us over into YouTube Live. The real value of a tool like Webinar Jam, the on-air component has some significant value, but for me, the real big value is in the webinar administration, is in the registration systems and logging people in, and in all of that kind of administrative stuff, and making sure that that worked effortlessly for us. So that will all continue through. So we're using the tool Webinar Jam, but the basic tenets that we're talking about can be applied to any webinar platform. Webinar Jam, as I say, based on Google Hangouts on Air, soon to be on YouTube Live. The other big tool out there is WebRTC. And the biggest difference you're going to find with tools that use WebRTC as a client, as opposed to Google Hangouts, is the WebRTC ones are typically going to charge you by the seat, by the number of people watching. There's also been some technical issues with tools like Safari not necessarily being able to play these playback webinars, although that is quickly going away. But it does, when you start choosing your webinar tool, it does impact you very significantly, because the WebRTC ones tend to be far more expensive, whereas there's no limit to the number of people in a Hangout. Now, the limits don't matter on a paid webinar like this, where there's 60 or 70 of you in the room, and and there's revenue attached. But when you're doing prospecting webinars, when you're doing free webinars, I've had a couple of webinars where we've had north of 1,000 people register. Now, we haven't had actually that many show up. I think the most we've ever had show up for webinars something north of 400. But you don't want to be turning people away when you're prospecting and you're building your authority. Having a tool that you can scale up is important without it costing you more. So that's one of the real appeals of a tool like Webinar Jam. There's also still dedicated solutions out there. I guess GoToWebinar is still kind of the flagship product in that space. And while they do have a web-based product, they still also have, for the most part, people are delivering webinars where you have to download an app onto your computer in order to view the webinar. And I do think that is yesterday's news. They have to get by that. And that's one of the things that really holds them back. And that's, as I say, tools like GoToWebinar. So that's just kind of a quick overview on some of the technologies. We'll get into more detail a little bit later on that stuff. But I just wanted to kind of give you that bit of an overview. But what I'd like to do next is I would like to go from here, and I would like Jen to cue up the video, and I want to jump into the video, which is walks you through the base content. Now, this is pre-recorded, this part coming up, but the benefit you're going to notice is you should notice something right away. As soon as the video starts playing, you should notice that the quality improves. Here's technically what happens, and I think this is important to understand. When you're delivering a webinar live and streaming the way we are right now, what happens is my computer here at my desk has to take my video and audio and compress it and upload it to the internet. It's my computer's job to do that. So not only does it have to be kind of following everything that's going on, but it's got real-time responsibility for taking this audio and video, compressing it, and sending up. Because if it was to send up uncompressed audio and video, it would require too much bandwidth. It would take, and so we wouldn't be able to stream. So the video has to be compressed. It has to be made smaller. When we play a pre-recorded video that we've already uploaded to a service like YouTube, we've recorded it in high definition, we've compressed it on our computer, and now we've uploaded it already, but it took much longer to compress, so it's a much smaller file, and now it's being served online, and it can be served through in higher quality. So this is where you're going to get a quality difference. The reason I do hybrid webinars for the most part is A, time, but B, clarity of the image. When I start doing demos, when you start seeing screens, you remember just seeing my screen a few moments ago, if I tried to show you a menu, it would be all blurry and you would be quite frustrated. Whereas doing screencasting the way I do, recording my screens, and then uploading the video and then playing it inside of the live webinar, you will then have clear access or clear vision of things like menus and that sort of stuff, because we're taking advantage of the way that the compression works and where the video resides. Does that make sense? I sure hope that makes sense, because it's an important concept to understand. One of the reasons people wonder why I don't just do my demos live, because the screens would look like crap, to be perfectly honest. So with that, Jen, is there anything, any comments or anything that I should address before we jump into the live video?
No, I think people are hanging on to every word. They're quite quiet in the chat thus far, so that's
okay. That could be good.
That could be good. It could be bad. I don't know.
Okay.
It's a good thing.
I'll get you to launch the video. And folks, we will see you back here live in 35 minutes. The video will take 35 minutes, and then we'll be back with live Steve. In the meantime, there will be chat Steve happening. And now we have transitioned from the live introduction to the webinar that I was just giving you live with a bit of a slideshow to this pre-recorded insert that now I'm going to take you through the body of the content and do a little bit of a demo with you. Now, I love this style of webinar. We'll be talking about this technique a little bit later, but this is called a hybrid webinar where I am now in video, we're delivering video, and the real-time Steve is in chat with you, engaging with you and talking about hopefully how brilliant the pre-recorded Steve is. Now, webinars are increasingly becoming popular in the online space, and there's a variety of different courses out there that teach you how to deliver webinars. Now, I've gone through a lot of the content of those courses, and a lot of them deal with the same sort of premise around webinars. They don't spend as much time talking about the technology and the mechanisms within the webinar, but instead they talk about the webinar content itself and how it can be used as a persuasive medium. And indeed, it is a persuasive medium. I think that, well, the proof is that webinars do convert. They do deliver the goal that the webinar presenter has. Now, a lot of those, there seems to be a popular, I'm calling now the system. There's a lot of different webinar presenters that will walk you through a system of exactly how to structure your webinar as far as the narrative of your webinar in order to influence people to whatever goal you have, usually to sell a product or to get you to sign up for something. And they do, and really, if you think about it, they follow a lot the same narrative that I have just done now, and you probably do in your webinars, and you'll certainly recognize the structure when you start breaking it down. And that structure is you warm the audience up. You ask them where they're coming from. You get them feeling comfortable. You take a little bit of time for everybody to get settled in because the technology takes a little bit of time to get in place. So once you launch a webinar, you do this warm-up phase of welcoming people in and greeting them. So similar to the, you know, just the pre-roll if you go to the movie theater, or the overture if you go to see a theater event or a musical, you warm the audience up and get them set for what's coming next. Since most webinars are sales or some sort of persuasion-related topic, then you start with your backstory. You start telling and setting you the bona fides of the person presenting, because often we're going to have an audience that doesn't necessarily know the person that's presenting, or if they've been brought cold, or they're not really intimately aware of what your authority is and just what you know, and they don't even like you yet, perhaps. You tell a backstory that engages you with the audience, and some of the webinar presenters will tell you to spend as much as 10 or 15 minutes telling your story. I think that certainly in a paid webinar like this one I think that's a bit of a, I think that it's self-serving to a certain extent and a bit manipulative. I don't think people, if you can in 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes, encapsulate your background so that people trust you and are interested and engaged with you, I think how you present your content as you move ahead is going to be far more relevant as far as creating authority with your audience than any story of just how great it is that you overcame all of these hardships in the past. Then, once you've established yourself and created some sort of a connection with your audience, you move on to the pain. What is this webinar about? What am I solving for you? What is it in your life that needs changing, that you need to spend money with me, or you need to follow my philosophy or my the angle that I take to deal with these issues? So we describe these universal challenges that we face, which we, of course, have a solution for, which we present in the solution. So once the solution has been presented, then comes the call to action, which is typically going to be, would you like to sign up? Would you like to learn more? Would you like to purchase something from me? And we get to that point there, or would you like to try our software? Would you like to try the free trial? Whatever the goal of your webinar is brought in the call to action. And then they typically will teach you to use an online sales technique which creates either false scarcity or urgency in some way, or real scarcity perhaps. Scarcity is the price is only available for this period of time, the course starts on this date and you can't get the course after this date. Some sort of urgency in order to get you to actually sign up, because studies and just experience teaches us that people, if they think that it's available to them for all time in the future, they tend to never purchase. You have to create some sort of almost a mini crisis, some urgency in order for them to actually fill out the form, purchase the product, sign up for the training, whatever it is you're trying to get them to do. And so we typically do that by setting a time limit on when it's available, or a special offer that's only available for, again, a time limited offer. Maybe there's a certain number of seats that are available in the course or in what you're offering, so you create some urgency. But all taken together, this is a system, and the system is designed to persuade you to do whatever the webinar host is going to be presenting. We can take a lot, I think, you and I, from how the system works, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have to believe in the system as the best way of always delivering our content. Personally, I tend to lean far more towards a kind of a more, for lack of a better term, mature approach, where or a softer sell approach, where I don't like to feel like I'm manipulating my audience. I will use techniques to create urgency and those sorts of things because I know they work, but for the most part, I don't want to falsely create some sort of undue influence on people in order to sign up for my products or purchase my products. I think that great content, great material stands on its own, and if we do a good job of articulating our value proposition, we're probably going to convert people on into whatever our goal is. And people who are converted in a straightforward mechanism, I think, tend to stay with you a lot longer. You don't end up disappointing them. They don't feel that they were coerced into it. So while I take a lot from the system, I don't choose to use all of the system, or certainly all of the system the way that's presented in the webinars that I deliver. And it's going to be up to you to choose how you want to do it. But that brings us to the 4 keys, my 4 keys of a successful webinar. And I think successful webinars all have these 4 elements involved in each and every one. First is engagement. Your content has to be engaging. That's one of the reasons that I pre-record the videos that I do here for the meat of my content, because I believe that we get far more engagement if you can see my face, if you can see my eyes. You can feel the excitement, and you can see it in my posture, in the tilt of my head, in how my eyes and my face gets excited about some important point, or I get all surly about some point that isn't so savory. Engagement breeds success as far as webinars go. If you feel you're engaged, and you're probably engaging with me in typing right now, we're engaging in multiple levels. If you feel engaged, you are going to learn more, and you are going to get more value out of the content. So number 1 goal always is creating engagement. Always thinking about that. The second is you have to set your authority. And you set your authority by delivering valuable content and delivering it with emphasis and with clarity, by respecting the amount of time that your audience is spending with you. Even free webinars have a cost attached in time. So you have to recognize that, and you have to respect that. By delivering your content with authority, establishing authority, proving that you have the wherewithal, the understanding to deliver valuable content, that is the next stage. Because even if you deliver great content, if your audience doesn't end up trusting you, they don't end up believing you, then that's lost. And in fact, you might end up actually being detrimental to your goals if you can't establish authority. You can lose authority by being over salesy, by pushing too hard, by being obtuse, by saying, oh, you come to this free webinar, but the whole webinar is just a big sales pitch and there's no real content being delivered. You lose authority in those areas if you don't honor your content and honor your audience. So establishing authority is the next key to a successful webinar. Then, of course, is the content. I'm assuming that if you're going to be delivering a webinar, your content is great. And we're going to be dealing a lot more with the mechanisms of a successful webinar today. So I'm going to assume that you've got the content thing down. The 4th element of a successful webinar is almost the outcome of a successful webinar, and that is that you establish a relationship, a rapport with your audience. And even if they don't end up doing business with you or following up on your advice today, that you are now part of they're aware of you, they have the proper feelings of trust and interest in what you have to present, and you've started or more firmly established that relationship. I'm pretty sure each of you that are in these revenue webinars that I deliver have already attended several of my webinars before. And if these touch points ring true, you recognize that they have had that effect on you in bringing you into my community and bringing you ultimately into this course. You should be doing the same things and always concentrating on the same things in your webinars. So when you are ready to deliver your webinar, look at the composition of the webinar, look at the content you're delivering, look at the messaging, look at how your call to action is and what if you're selling something, when you're selling it, and if you are delivering on your promises in all of your promotional materials and all of your lead up to that webinar. If you're doing all of those things, chances are that you are going to indeed have a successful webinar. So here's the next really important thing. And I think maybe this is just my perspective because I come from the broadcast world, but I look at each webinar as a show. It's a broadcast, and no different than I look at my television show or radio shows that I've done or theater that I do. And the same preparation goes into it. I want a narrative. I want an energy. I look for the same kind of flow as I do in a television show as I do in a webinar because they are broadcasts. And so if we treat them as such, if we take the lessons that we learn by doing live television and live radio and we learn how we create good products in those areas, if we apply those principles to webinars, I think we're way ahead of the game. So many people look at webinars as extensions of video conferencing. They think of it first as a video conference as opposed to a webinar, so they think of it as the conversational side, which is good, but they don't think about that entertainment side. They don't think about all of the little bits of detail that we concentrate on when we produce broadcasts that then make our webinars more successful, down to how it's staffed, how we present it, how we script it out, how I prepare. All of those make a big difference. So when you think about it, if you're broadcasting, if you were doing a television show, you would have a very deep commitment to things like value, making sure that you're doing a good job. Edutainment. I would have said entertainment or education, but since this is really edutainment, we want to keep people engaged, we want to keep people interested, and we want them to be informed, so we commit to that. Ultimately, you commit to your audience. I want to move the ball downfield for you. I want to make sure that you know more, you understand the topic that I'm covering better when you leave the webinar than when you came in. I want to respect your time and deliver that value to you. So I treat all of my webinars as broadcasts. So if you're going to be delivering a broadcast, then you've got to create a performance. Now, what do we need for this performance? What did I need to do this webinar today, to do the one that we did last month, to do the one I'm doing next month? First of all, of course, you need great content, which is your script. Again, we're not going to be talking about that much today, but always, always, always concentrating on making sure that the narrative is good. Then we need a stage. And the stage in this particular case is the Google Hangout on Air that we're doing right now, and it's the tools that I use. So the tools that I use are the set, are the staging that I've created to create the world that we're in, to support the story that I'm telling. And so I'm using the tool Webinar Jam, which I will dive into, and I will show you all of the preparation in just a few moments. The other thing that every show needs is an audience. And for those of us in the content marketing world, audience development and building an audience is one of the most important skills that we should do, and we have to be doing it constantly. We're not going to spend a lot of time in how I promote webinars in this particular one today, but I think that's a topic that we should be spending a lot of time on talking about later, because how you build your list and how you generate an audience is crucial to the overall success of the webinar, because you need people in order for a webinar to be successful. You need that audience. But beyond the marketing to the audience, you need a solid administrative system so that you can register them, so that you can track them, so that you can have a conversation with those people. Once you've signed up for one of my webinars, that is a big goal for me. But if I can't do anything with that connection, if once you said, "Hello, Steve, I'd like to take your webinar," and then you just watch the webinar, and then I lose you into the ether, I've done neither of us any good. I haven't created the opportunity for real long-term engagement to bring you into my community, to show you the fullness of what I can teach, nor to learn from you and to have you participating and enriching my community. So making sure that we have the communication back end is ever so important. Getting the proper emails going out so that people appear in the webinar and can participate in it. They get the follow-up content they need, and that we can then move them into our other channels of communication. So the integration between the webinar tools and our own CRM, our customer relationship management tool, whatever it is, that's essential. So we'll be touching on that in just a few moments, and I'll be showing you the kind of the ins and outs of that. Once you're through setting up your audience, getting it registered, then you actually have to deliver the webinar itself. And for that, I want to talk about this, which is the on-the-day part. We are in the middle of the webinar right now. You noticed I did one thing at the very beginning of this webinar, is I introduced Jen. Jen works with me on all of my different projects, but on this particular day, her job is a very specific job. She is my producer. She is the person that sits in the back and keeps all of the webinar content moving ahead. And she basically removes the responsibility of administering the webinar when we're on air from me and allow me to concentrate on content, concentrate on delivery. There's very few of us that have the technical ability to be able to manage all of the back end of a webinar and still concentrate on the content that has to be delivered. Delivering content, especially if you're delivering a webinar live, even as a slideshow, requires a tremendous amount of focus and concentration to make sure that you're focused in on the content that you're delivering at the time that you're delivering that content. So worrying about somebody who's having trouble with their audio being out of sync, or that you want to load this graphic in because you're going to be putting this offer in a little bit later in the webinar, that distracts the presenter from their performance. And if we look at this as a performance, as a show, then you want the main actors, in this case me, to be focused on my content and my delivery, focusing all my energy. The only way that can happen is if I have a producer. So Jen's participation in this webinar is essential. Now I'm recording and I'm going to show you what happens in the background in the dashboard as the chat happens, and I'll be talking you through what the sort of things that a producer is going to bring to the table in the mini course. We don't have time to do it right here in the video, but in the mini course we will be talking about, we will have a module that will talk about those things. So you have to determine within your team who is your presenter and who's not. Now, to be fair, I sometimes do webinars solo, but I've done them so long that I've probably got a higher technical level than most. But the other thing is, by using these hybrid webinars, I know that as soon as I get into the meat of the content and start delivering the video this way, that I can do all of the administrative things in the back. Now, I would never do that for a webinar I'm charging for, only for free webinars. And typically speaking, the only time I really do it is if Jen happens to sleep in that day, which of course never happens, but happened once. And it leaves me having to do it. I'm able to, but it's not the best way to do things, and you should always plan for redundancy to make sure that you have people in the right positions. A producer, as well as your content presenter. And if you have guests, of course, then you've got that additional extra layer as well. So, let's talk about the tools. Now this, as we mentioned, is a hybrid webinar that you're seeing right now. I don't think you have to do hybrid webinars. You can certainly do slideshow webinars with voiceover, but I'm pretty sure already by this point in this webinar, you recognize the value of this video inclusion. It's not really a shortcut, because what we do is, by me recording this beforehand, I'm able to consolidate the content, making sure that I'm on message and on point. It's easy to kind of get off and start wandering in the weeds if you're not careful. So we respect your time a little bit more by actually making the webinar a little more compressed, a little more focused, and a little shorter by recording the video. I can edit out mistakes, etc. That's number one. Number two is we can actually deliver increased value, because while I'm presenting the main content here in the video, real-time Steve is in chat answering a lot of the simple questions, so that when we get to the Q&A at the end of the webinar, I can answer kind of the broader questions that everybody's interested in. And again, we compress the amount of time. We deliver more content into a shorter amount of time. That's a win-win for all of us. At the end of the day, what we're doing is we're honoring our content. We're honoring and respecting that our content is valuable, and that we're making sure that it's focused, and we've taken the time to present it in the best form possible. We're honoring our audience, you. We're honoring your time by making sure that your time is spent as effectively as possible by compressing as much of the value into as short a period of time as possible. And we're also respecting ourselves, because by putting the work into our content, we're showing respect for that content that we create ourselves. So that's why I like this particular hybrid version of the webinar. But regardless of what type of webinar, looking at those main values, looking at how much information density we apply and we deliver in our webinar, that's worth thinking about as well. So I think it's time for you and I to dive into a little bit of a demo. Now, before I show you the software, I'm going to tell you we're just going to scrape the surface of these tools right now. We'll go into far more detailed demos in the mini course. I just don't want to take I've timed this out, and it takes me about 35 or 45 minutes just to show you Webinar Jam, just to show you a setup of any version of webinar software and the different things you have to do. So I'm just going to show you a few of the most important things right now, kind of the real touch points, and then in the mini course you will find more detail, and so you want to dive in when you get the login for the mini course. So the tool that you're using, as you're well aware now, is Webinar Jam we are using. I don't recommend it. I don't not recommend it either. It uses Google Hangouts on air. You'll notice that when I'm in the live broadcast, the resolution is so-so, it's okay. When we're in this hybrid version of the webinar, when we're in the video portion, the video quality is far superior. The reason is it's coming streamed. It's already compressed, and we're getting higher quality video, another one of the benefits of the webinar. There are other tools that will give us better quality in streaming, but some of them miss some of the, are lacking some of the administrative tools, etc. So I own Webinar Jam Studio. It's the tool that I use, and the important thing is that all of these different points that I'm going through are relevant regardless of the webinar software that you choose to deliver your products on. So we're going to jump right now into the configuration for the webinar, which we're watching right now. We'll just use this, and now I'm recording this the day before. So this is yesterday if you're in this video with us live, or it's weeks ago if you're watching it in the mini course. But this is the webinar set up right now. Now, when we go in and when we start editing a webinar in Webinar Jam Studio, they have this dashboard that walks us through all of the different points that we can configure in our webinar configuration. And that's exactly what we're doing right now, is we're configuring the presentation that you are seeing right now. So for me, in real time, it's happening tomorrow. So each of these little checkpoints along the top are different areas that we are supposed to go into to configure the webinar. And I'm not going to go into all of them right now. They will be all in the mini course. But you start out by configuring your presenters, who's going to be presenting. You set up in the configuration, you set up the schedule, the time of the webinar, the type of webinar it is. So that would be if you had a one-off webinar, if you had those same webinar being delivered multiple times, if you're, say, doing a product launch, or perhaps a series where people sign up for one webinar, and over the course of 4 weeks, they're brought into 4 different webinars, all on the same topic, but they only have to sign in once. So you set up the style of webinar. Then you set up who's presenting, who's administering, who's producing, and if you have any guests in. So all of that is done in the very first couple of little modules. But the first one that I want to talk about is this registration page, because the registration page is ever so important. Webinars are not successful unless there's people watching the webinar, and in order to get people watching the webinar, you have to have a registration page. Now, many of you already have WordPress sites, and you have the ability to have landing pages, and you know what a landing page is. But I'm just going to walk through how that all works right now. So landing pages are the pages people go to where they opt in, where they register for your webinar. When you go to a landing page, a bunch of very important things happen. Or when you go into a webinar registration page, a bunch of very important things happen. We capture your email address and your name. You are sent an email that follows up immediately telling you that you're registered and giving you a link to be able to visit and come into the webinar. You all got those emails from me, or actually from this system, when you signed up for this webinar or any of my previous webinars. So this facilitates and begins the ongoing communication between you, the webinar creator, and your audience. And this is essential for making webinars successful, because we want it to be the beginning of a relationship, the beginning of a dialogue. So this ongoing communication becomes essential. But you have to have a page that appeals to people, that is easy for them to find where they enter their information, that explains to them the content that they're going to be learning so that they're not disappointed when they come to the webinar, or that if they're on the fence, they're encouraged to sign up for the webinar, or even more important, if it's a for sale webinar like this, that they're encouraged to purchase the webinar. So we need all of those that different functionality. Now, what they include here with Webinar Jam is they include a bunch of templates that allow you to create your landing pages very simply yourself. Now, I'm just going to go back out into my main dashboard here, and I'm going to show you what one of their pages looks like, because I use custom pages. Well, I do an entire other process, which I, again, will show you in the mini course, how I create a landing page myself in WordPress on my own site, and then I integrate that with Webinar Jam so that I can capture the information of people who register in my CRM and my in Infusionsoft, so that you're in my mail list as well. But if I was just doing a simple free one-off webinar, or if I'm just beginning and I don't have all of the technical capability or the back end in order to support all of that, I can do what we did here for this webinar. So this is a webinar I delivered a few months ago, but I used one of their landing pages. So if I go in and first of all, I'll edit the template and show you that this is one that we did to talk about the launch of Text Expander. So we did this to our productivity community. So I put in bullet points of what you were going to be learning. I had a list I created in the early part of the setup, who was going to be presenting in this webinar, and 3 of us were going to be presenting in it. And this was the result, and actually a pretty good landing page. So let's preview it. When we click on preview, this is what, and some of you might have even taken this webinar, this is where you would have gone. We sent out a link with this, and when people clicked on register, they were brought in and they were walked through the process of registering for this webinar, and then we delivered this webinar. So this is their landing pages. To learn how you integrate your own personal landing pages, if you have your own software, your own WordPress site, and in order to set that up, check out the mini course when you receive the link in a few days, or if you've already got it now, just go and check it out. But that will, I will walk through that integration. But the bottom line is, good webinar software has landing page and registration software that helps you out. The reason that that's important to a successful webinar is it starts the dialogue. And it begins the long-term relationship between you and me. Now, jumping back into the software here itself, let me go back into the webinar that we are doing right now. Once you've set up your landing page, the next thing that you do, and I will just show you this quickly, is you set up notifications. Now, notifications are the emails that you receive when you immediately subscribe to a webinar, and then those last-minute notifications that you receive beforehand to remind you that the webinar was happening. And the notifications has become actually quite sophisticated. Now, a tool like Webinar Jam Studio, and most of them have their own built-in email autoresponder of sorts. And the nice thing about using these tools is they automatically create what we call the shortcode, what are called short codes that automatically populate information. So if I was to write an email telling you, thanking you for registering for this webinar, I would have had to put in for the anatomy of a successful webinar, and then I would have had to type in the time, etc. When it's built into the software like this, and we take a look at the email that you received 15 minutes before this webinar launched, if I go in and take a look at that, within here are all of these little hashtag things: hashtag title, hashtag presenter, hashtag date, hashtag link. These are short codes that Webinar Jam creates for us that automatically populates the information from the rest of the webinar software. So I didn't have to put the title in. If you go back and look at that email, the title of the webinar is in, as it was that I wrote into the software. The link to be able to view this webinar is there. I didn't have to go and copy and paste the webinar. It's dynamic and it changes each time. Now, you can edit any of the content within it, but this same email notification template I use for all of my webinars, because I don't have to go in it. It pulls the information that's required for people who've registered for that particular webinar. This is a very powerful tool in making sure that bums end up in seats. Go through a lot of effort to tell people, to get people to register for a webinar. Some webinars have as low as a 10 or 15% show-up rate of people showing up, which is a lot of work to go into to get people to register and have them not show up. They don't show up because they forget. Sometimes they have buyer's remorse and they don't really want to take the webinar. But for the most part, it's just because they forget. And so having proper follow-ups, and you could even add SMS follow-ups, which is an additional way to bring people in. Having those things set up means that you are going to ultimately have people in your webinar. So another key to making sure that your webinar is successful is the people you have invited, who've accepted the invitation, make sure they show up. So you follow up using a series of follow-ups. And I use the notifications tools right within Webinar Jam. Once we're done with this webinar, I will send you'll get a follow-up email from this an hour afterwards, which you see configured right here. And this is what it's going to look like, and you'll see it come an hour later. And it will include the webinar replay link in here as well. So that will come to you, and the title is going to be Reminder, the webinar replay video. That's what's going to come to you. I'll actually add something from the secrets. I know I spelled that wrong. Just a minute. There we go. Okay, so now it's actually going to have a longer title. I'm going to save that. So I just made this change. So when you receive this, you're going to get the email that says, from us, the secrets of a successful webinar, an hour after we're live. I just made that change. Very cool. Okay, so I use this tool for everything related to the webinar, and then for all other communications, what happens is I then communicate with my audience using my CRM software, in my case Infusionsoft. So the notifications creates this follow-up email connection to get people to come, and then if we go to the very next tab here, which is the integrations, I gotta save my changes. I always forget to save my changes. There we go. Save your changes, Steve. There we go. And then this integrations tab allows me to take everything that happens here in Webinar Jam and integrate it with my Infusionsoft, which is my main CRM. And again, this is going to be a separate video in the mini course that shows you how this integration happens. But effectively what happens is when you purchase this course, I set this software up so that you actually went to an Infusionsoft purchase engine and you had purchased it in Infusionsoft. It registered you in the course, and then this software, Webinar Jam Studio, sent a tag notification through to Infusionsoft to let me know that you had registered. So again, I will walk you through that. Why is integration with your CRM important? And your CRM could be, you can see here, it could be Aweber, it could be MailChimp, it could be iContact or GetResponse, ActiveCampaign. I've got Infusionsoft. There are others. Why is it important? Because I need to know who is participating in what activities. And in order for me to effectively communicate with you, in order for me to effectively continue to build our relationship, I need to know in the tool that I communicate with you on a daily basis, and that is Infusionsoft. So this level of integration is another key to a successful webinar. Successful webinars are not just about me delivering the content or you delivering the content to your audience. So they say, wow, that was interesting. Steve's a smart guy, or wow, that's interesting. I learned a lot from that, and there's something that I can do about that. No, successful webinars help to enrich our relationship. They are another good memory in what is hopefully a whole string of contacts and memories that you and I have together. And in order for that to happen, I need to find a way to stay in touch with you on a constant basis. So getting your information into Infusionsoft so that I can now communicate with you for my other products, for other things you might be interested in, for other things you might learn from me, and things that I might learn from you, that is essential, as far as I'm concerned, to a successful webinar. All right, let me dive back in here. So once we've done integrations, I don't want to spend too much more time on this. We send out a thank you. Oh, we incorporate the live aspect, which is where this video gets incorporated. So let me save here and proceed to steps. The live aspect. This is where we actually set the integration of putting the video in. But since I'm just recording the video now, you can't see that happen. Again, that will be in the full demo of Webinar Jam Studio in the webinar configuration software in the mini course. We set up the live and choose how you're going to deliver your replay. In this particular case, there was a monetization feature attached, and again, we will show you that in order so you can make money from your product if you choose to. And then once it's all done, we tap on finish, and the webinar is complete and ready to go. Once it's complete and ready to go, before we actually deliver the webinar, we then have to send out links to the different people that are involved administratively. So if I go live, so here's the webinar here. So tomorrow morning before I, about an hour before this webinar goes live, I will go in here and I will choose the presenter links, and Jen and I won't send it to myself, but Jen will be sent an email with links for her to go in and view the live room and also get into the control panel. And I will also click on these links here in order to launch the webinar. So this is administratively how this happens in the back end, how we set it up. And again, in the mini course, I'll kind of show you this process, and you'll be able to see, I'll actually record what's happening in the webinar in real time in the mini course as well. So you'll get a lot better feedback for exactly what's happening there. So that is the setup, as far as I'm concerned, for a successful webinar, the technical side of the setup. We spent a lot of time talking about the content and what we want to deliver as far as content on screen. And now we've shown you the back end. And you've seen how I put the different pieces in place in order to deliver the webinar that we're participating in right now. So the next thing I'd like to do is we're going to stop this video and we're going to jump back in and we're going to start answering all of your questions. I should be back. There we go. I hope the transition was smooth. How are you doing, Jen?
I am fabulous. Great video, Steve.
Did you fall asleep?
No, I was engaged, very engaged, just like I've never seen it before.
So in the interest of total transparency, when I was saying that I recorded that yesterday, I actually recorded it Monday because the initial plan was for this to be on Tuesday. So that's why. That's the only part there that was inaccurate as far as I could tell. So I would like to take a few minutes now and start to answer your questions. So if you have any questions from what we just covered, enter them now. Now, these questions are important from two perspectives. One, obviously, we want to give as much value as we can right now. But two, from your questions, if there's anything that's really important that I don't have time to answer, that I think needs more detail, it gives me time to include the answers in the mini course before I send it out. So I find these Q&As to be valuable, exceptionally valuable from both perspectives. Now, Michael has a couple of questions. The first question was, you probably covered this, but what times, dates have I found best for webinars, and do I offer AM and PM options as a bit of to hit a variety of customers in time zones worldwide? And that is a real challenge for me, or I think it is for all webinar people. I live on the west coast of Canada. I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, so I'm on Pacific time. And so my webinars are 3 hours earlier in the day for me than they would be on the East Coast. But of course, they're 8 hours ahead of our friends in Ireland and England. They're, I don't know, like 16 hours behind our friends in Australia. Some stupid number. I always lose track of that. But you can't possibly deliver a webinar in the time zone that's going to work for everybody. So I find the biggest challenge is actually the clarity of describing the time zone. And what I do is I mention in all of my promo materials, which it is Pacific and East Coast time, because the preponderance of people are in North America that come to these webinars. So I put in those two time zones. But then we have so many from England, so many from Australia, that they just have to kind of work it out themselves. I have tried in the past to skew my webinars and even deliver them as early as like 1 and 2 in the morning my time, especially when we're doing product launches, to be able to make it in the middle of the workday for our Australian and New Zealand friends and that sort of stuff. And here's what I found. They seem to almost now be used to watching webinars outside of their work hours. In North America, it seems, now this is completely my opinion, not science, but it seems in North America, we are comfortable with participating in webinars during the workday because that's the time that they're delivered. But actually, maybe we can get comments from our friends that are in Europe. I think that they are now more used to consuming webinars in the evening. And that if they're in the middle of the day, they actually find it more difficult to carve out time that's in the middle of the day to watch a webinar because it hasn't become part of their system, the part of their life. So that's just kind of a trend that I see developing. When I'm launching a product, I will have webinars from starting at about 6 or 7 in the morning my time through to the early evening my time. And I also make sure I give one on Saturday morning and one on Sunday mornings in each of the cycles, because I do get great engagement when I do product webinars on weekends. So
Roy says, yes, you are correct, Steve.
Sorry?
Roy says, yes, you are correct. And I believe, Roy, you are in Brazil. I believe that's what he said in the beginning. So I think time-wise, he's agreeing with you.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah,
Oh, no, he's in
it
UK.
started at 7 p.m. in the UK. What Roy's saying is that they're used to consuming them in the evening, I think, is what the
Yeah.
comment that I made was. So that's yeah. So we're getting a lot of feedback there. Yeah, it's true from a European point of view. I'm getting from Michael. Yeah. So so we're sitting there. We're kind of so it's so as far as the times. The other thing is everybody's community is different. Everybody's community is unique. If you were, say, doing webinars to young moms, you might be looking for a different time zone than you would if you're doing webinars to seniors, because their free time might be a little bit different than what a senior's free time might be. Or if you're doing it for, for working professionals as opposed to, a golf webinar, which is people are looking at for their leisure time. So part of that is going to be knowing your audience as well. As far as repetition goes, I find that offering a replay is I think it's got more value than a lot of people might recognize. Here's the thing: because the webinars are live and in real time, there's an extra level of engagement. There's an extra appeal to webinars, to the point that some people produce webinars using tools that create what I call faux webinars, which look like they're live, but they're actually pre-recorded and they're completely fake. But they do that because because they believe that there is a greater engagement in a live webinar. And I think that there is. But if people are truly interested in your content, if you create great and compelling content, they will watch a replay. Now, the thing is, putting in what I found with my replays with this is when you get the replay from this particular video, you'll be frustrated a little bit because it has to run in real time the way that the webinar replay runs. So you can't fast forward to a point that you want to get more of or move ahead. So if you can pull your webinar content out in a replay, when I put it into the mini course, you can fast forward in it. And often when I do a webinar, I will put it up on YouTube for public consumption, and I'll put an index in of when I talk about different topics and let people jump ahead to the area they want. If they do that, I find that the engagement goes up dramatically because people won't watch the whole webinar recorded, typically speaking, but they will jump to the areas they're interested in. So you can give them navigation to get to those points. Then you can serve your community very effectively, maybe do less webinars, but you're still spending the time and the energy in editing them and making them more valuable as far as the consumption goes. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so Michael Axel mentioned there's another Google Hangout on Air tool called Easy Webinar, which is, yeah, it's another tool, and I'm actually meeting with the founder of that, the creator at Casey, tomorrow, because they also have the ability to already gate this into YouTube Live, which I want to know more about, so I'm going to be talking to him about that tomorrow. So I'm going to be looking at it. So actually, this gives me the opportunity to kind of float the idea. I don't see there's too many questions. So here's the idea that I've got, that I ran by Jen today, and this is just a little quick aside. I'm thinking of hosting a webinar in about 2 weeks, which I, for lack of a better term, I'm calling Webinar Palooza. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sign up for each of the main webinar platforms, and we're going to deliver little mini webinars. Hopefully it'll take less than a couple of hours, but I'm going to, if you sign up for it, there'll be like 8 or probably 6 signups where you have to sign up for each. We'll do Webinar Jam, we'll do Easy Webinar, we'll do Huzzah, we'll do Click Webinar. We'll do each of the different webinar formats. I will record the administrative process. I'm not going to make it a fancy video, but to see what the back end looks like. And then you'll be able to see in the space of an hour and a half, you'll be able to see as a consumer what each of the webinars look like and what the functionality looks like. We'll go into each webinar, we'll play back a little bit of a video, we'll screen share so you can see the main sharing. We'll do a slideshow in each one so that you can see what it looks like from a consumer's perspective. As well, I'll be able to describe what it's like from a content creator's perspective. Is that something that's of value? We're not going to charge for it. We're going to make it a free webinar. It's a lot of work, but I think that I would love to be able to see and be able to log into 6 different webinars and see what it's like from 6 different perspectives, the same content, just concentrating on delivery. What does the video look like? What's the audio quality look like? And we have a constant because it's all going to be coming from my system. So you'll be able to see how they compare to each other. Do you guys like that idea? Let us know in the chat.
So
that
far,
would be a great idea.
Are,
good.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you like the name Webinar Palooza?
Roy says he'll just take your final recommendation.
Oh, yeah. That's lazy, Roy.
It looks like we did have a question from Frank. He was asking, do you package the live content together with the pre-recorded stuff for the replay?
Yeah, quite often what I'll do, Frank, is I'll do a couple of things. The live webinar replay will package both the pre-recorded and the live together and deliver it. And deliver it as a contiguous stream. What I do as well, though, is I take the YouTube feed, which doesn't have the live video in it, which doesn't have the pre-recorded video in it, and I will I'll download it to my computer. I will re-edit it with the live portion, and then I will repost that to YouTube to share it again. So that's one of the ways that I do it. So I'll do some editing, and I can also tighten up the top and tail of it. And, we can also take the, maybe hour and 15 webinar and trim it down to an hour, that sort of thing, by cutting out some of the frivolous, the little chat that we do at the beginning, the host chat and that sort of stuff. So yes, I think it's important to always have all of your content available within the webinar, if you're going to be sharing it.
Anthony's wondering if you're going to sing at the end. I think that should be, no one should sign up unless we get Steve to commit to singing at the end.
My voice feels, I will tell a story though, because my voice is shattered because I yelled at the top of my lungs yesterday. And I yelled at my poor dog Farley because as I was sitting in my front room, a wee little skunk walked across our yard. Now, Farley has been skunked in his life 6 times, desperately skunked. I'm talking about full-on facial from the skunk. At some point, it isn't an accident anymore, but it's a lifestyle choice, I believe. So when I saw the skunk, I went, oh, skunk, and Farley at almost the exact same moment, exact same moment, like empathetically intuitive, sees the skunk, beats out through the door after the skunk. I'm on Farley's tail as fast as I can go, screaming at the top of my lungs because, oh, he listens so well. Farley. Skunk is now freaking because he's got me and Farley chasing him. He's trying to get in the next yard. The dog in the next yard's barking. Skunk's tail's up. It could be a disaster. It could have been a catastrophic disaster. But Farley stayed back a bit and kept dodging in and out. The skunk is freaking out. The skunk finally goes under a separate door into our yard. And as it goes, it does its spray. But fortunately, Farley's back enough far that we're not in the actual catchment area, but just in the aerosol area. So his eyes get all burny and stingy. I'm hit by a wall of skunk stink, but it's not on me. I don't actually get any of the oily substance on me. So we survived. Having said this story, my voice is wrecked. So I can't sing. I'm going to have to edit this out.
Well, you have 2 weeks, though.
What's that?
You have 2 weeks, though.
Oh, am I going to sing in the webinar one?
Yes.
In the next webinar?
Yes. And I like how Mike said, how about webinar confuser? All these platforms have me confused. That's
actually a good idea. That's a good idea.
That is a good one.
It should be Webinar Palooza or Webinar Confusion. I might steal that. I might use that, Mike. Thank you for crowdsourcing. I'm crowdsourcing the title now.
Yes.
This is great. As a vegetarian, Dee says, I think that repeat offenders might actually get high in the course that's following. No, I don't go over my screencasting setup, but I do have another mini course on screencasting, which teaches the basis of how I do all of my content, and it's that goes through all of my mumbo jumbo. And do you have the link for that, Jen?
I'm putting it in now.
Excellent. So Jen's putting that into the chat right now. So that allows you to sign up to learn how I make my videos, and that's a nice little. It's another mini course that goes through the entire screencasting process. Yeah. Thank you, Jen. There we go. What about the webinar revolver? Those are all good. Yeah, veterinarian and a
And a
vegetarian.
vegetarian.
The vegetarian veterinarian. That sounds like a Flight of the Concord song, doesn't it? Okay. And anybody that knows what I'm talking about, I want a yay. You don't know who the Flight of the Concord are, do you, Jen?
No, I do not.
Okay, fair enough. Google it.
Okay.
Okay, good. So they're looking forward to the mini course. Thank you, Roy says. Thank you. One closeout question. Is it worth upgrading to Screencast 6 for editing purposes? I have version 5. Yeah. ScreenFlow, are you talking about ScreenFlow 6, I believe, instead of Screen? I just automatically upgrade to the new version of ScreenFlow. The new version of ScreenFlow 6 includes the ability to demarc certain areas of the screen for recording, and it just gets more stable with each version. So I would, I think it's $30 or something like that, or it's probably in pounds.
That's a great question because I still keep getting the notification every time I start.
It's one, well, obviously because of what I do, it's one app that I just upgrade as soon as the upgrade notice comes out. I just click it and automatically do it. But the nice thing about it is that you also keep your old version if there is any technical issues with it. So they don't overwrite it, but they write a new copy on your hard drive. So, but yeah, for ScreenFlow, the software that I use for creating my videos, I just upgrade automatically. So with the amount of screencasting you do, I know that you're into it. I would say do it as well. Yeah, for sure.
Perfect.
Good stuff. All right. That's it. We're going to wrap things up. I think we've covered off everything. You're going to get the link to the replay. You get it. Oh, the chat I will also put in the course. So the chat transcript will be there as well. And you'll get, actually there'll be in this particular case, there'll be chat transcripts. That's chat transcripts from this and from the previous webinar, which we delivered, which was the one that we had trouble with before we did this one. Good. With that, Jen, thank you for your assistance today. Google Gods, thank you for delivering us a flawless webinar for us after the one on Tuesday. And to all of you who are so patient with us and came back and gave us a second chance at this, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your input and your support in our community ever so much. So till next time, I am Steve Dotto. Have fun storming the castle. Sit back and relax because this module is going to take us a little bit of time to work our way through. It's how you configure your webinar. So this is basically the administrative setup for your webinar. Now, we're not talking about content at this point. We're talking about the administration. We're talking about the registration form. We're talking about the date and the time of the webinar and the communication with the participants of the webinar, both presenters and audience within the webinar. So we're talking about all of that administrative detail. Now, depending on which webinar package you use,